So welcome to the third year of the Independent Accountability Panel's review of the Energy Charter disclosures. In opening the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Thank you for your disclosure and congratulations on your commitment to the Energy Charter and the Better Together initiatives and all the work that you've done. You know our panel, Cassandra Goldie from ACOS and Andrew Richards from EUAA. Just by way of opening, Ben, we've been saying that it is regrettable that in 2021 we're still talking about the impact of COVID-19 on individuals, families and businesses around Australia, including energy businesses, as well as natural disasters in some areas, the upsurge in housing pressures and other financial pressures that are impacting on so many people. So for these reasons, we consider that the themes of this year's report are likely to be very similar to build on those of last year. Affordability of essential services, transition to net zero emissions by 2050 or hopefully a lot earlier, but with the key consequent issue that no customer should be left behind in that transition, particularly on the grounds of affordability. So, and these themes have generally been confirmed by the stakeholder forums that we've held this year. Yep. So we're discussing those themes with you and the other CEO signatories to get your perspective and your view of 2021 and beyond. So we have some questions for you, but just in opening, if you'd like to make any opening remarks or highlights from your disclosure, and then we can open it up for general discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Claire, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to the panel today. I'll keep the opening remarks short, I think, to allow us to get into the detail. I think the way that I would characterise the last financial year is one of, I think, continuous progress and improvement on our day-to-day core metrics. So customer satisfaction, we're now at record levels. In fact, every year since we started measuring customer satisfaction, we've been at record levels. Our reliability performance has improved significantly this year, particularly at Multinet, where we had quite a difficult time in the winter of 2020. And our leak response also continues to improve. We've executed our mains replacement, I would say, very, very well, and that has safety and reliability implications for customers. So good continuous improvement and core business execution. There's been some, I think, important events which have an impact on the areas that you've mentioned, affordability and the energy transition. Firstly, price resets. So we've reset tariffs in South Australia, Queensland and Western Australia in the last financial year. And in all of those cases, I think we conducted very good stakeholder engagement. We were rewarded for our stakeholder engagement program for South Australia, for example. So I think a high degree of consultation with stakeholders, but also in the case of our distribution businesses, with end customers as well. We do a lot of work with focus groups. So well-supported plans which delivered price cuts in all cases. And these are price cuts which we proactively offer up. We don't wait for regulators to impose them upon us. So we've delivered, I think, price cuts. But importantly, certainly in the case of Western Australia, that decision also incorporated a recognition of the changing role of gas and the increased risk around gas going forward. And so there was an adjustment to asset lives as part of that. And this comes to this point, I think, of managing the energy transition in a way which is fair and which doesn't avoid price shocks. And really that is a big focus for us at the moment, is making sure we can manage that transition, not disadvantage the customers who are stranded and left on the networks if other customers leave, for example, and keep prices flat. So I think we've made good progress on that, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the discussion. We've also, I think, in terms of new activities this year, we've made major progress on hydrogen. We now blend green hydrogen into our gas distribution network, or part of our gas distribution network in South Australia, as a business as usual activity. And we're the only people in Australia doing that, and one of very few in the world doing that. So again, that's beginning to make that transition. And then probably the last thing that I'd highlight over the last year is what has been called our Vulnerable Customer Assistance Program, but we're now renaming that our Priority Service Program. And that focuses on vulnerable customers and offers a differentiated level of customer support to those customers. That has been approved and is now being rolled out in South Australia and Queensland. And we're hopeful to also have that in place in Victoria in the not too distant future. So I would say continuous improvement in the core business and some major initiatives around affordability through the transition, and also for vulnerable customers.
Thanks very much, Ben. Andrew?
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I thought I'd start with an easy one, Ben. You've already mentioned it. So the energy transition. And I guess, as we've talked about before, the extremes of that seems to be you either electrify everything or we're a hydrogen superpower. And they both have costs and benefits and ramifications. But sitting in that, there's this issue of stranded asset risk and the intergenerational equity issue that you've talked about. And we've watched and discussed how AGIG in particular is taking the lead on that. I have to say, for the record, you're far more advanced as a company on this issue of risk management and intergenerational equity, and being realistic that, yes, plan A is hydrogen in the pipes or renewable gas, and plan B is reducing the risk in case we don't. But we're not seeing that same level of sophistication in some of the others, unfortunately. So recognizing that you're already heading down that path, and with your experience in this, on the energy transition for your business and business like yours, what are the things that are making it easier that we need to keep doing more of? And what are the things that are making it harder that we've just got to stop doing and get away from or have a solution to? So easier to do more of, harder do less of.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think probably what I'll come at most of all is the need to preserve choice and optionality. That is the most important thing. And the exam question, I think, with the energy transition, in particular the future of gas networks, is not for a bunch of smart people to sit in a room, do a lot of analysis and decide what the right answer is, whether it's electrification or hydrogen, and then make policy settings which take us down one route or the other. That is not what we need to be doing. So to the extent there's a tendency for that to be happening, we need to be doing less of that. What do we need to be doing more of? We need to be considering the range of possible options which could eventuate, and making no regrets decisions which position us for those options. What does that look like? It looks like, and as you have alluded to, protecting the downside risk, the risk of customers beginning to leave the gas networks or new customers not connecting in a sort of negative price volume spiral, but also maximizing the chance that a transition can be made. And I think this is very important. And I think we're making reasonable progress in this area. What I think would be very difficult would be if new gas connections were banned, for example, in Victoria going forward. I think that would have a very negative consequence on the sector. It would have a negative environmental impact, because right now, if you shift your domestic heating load from natural gas to electricity, you use that electricity in the mornings and the evenings. That's when you use hot water heating and cooktops. And there is no solar in the morning and in the evenings. So unless you have a battery, that is going to be mains power, which is going to be coal at that time of day. So there's a negative environmental consequence from shifting in the short term. That's the first point. The second point then is what happens if we do that, new customers stop connecting, existing customers take a view on the long-term sustainability of the gas network, and therefore when it's time to put in new appliances, they go electric. people start reducing, people start leaving, and the costs of the network get amortized over a smaller and smaller number of customers. What does that mean? It means the ones that can't switch are left to pick up the bill. So this business of no customers left behind. It's the people that can't afford to put in all new electric appliances or put in a domestic battery that are left in this worst case scenario, stuck on the gas network, picking up the bills. It's a bit like the inequities that you see in electricity, potentially with people who can't afford rooftop solar, don't get the benefits, but actually bear some of the reinforcement costs for the network for that. It's a similar inequity, and we've seen that in electricity. We need to make sure that those things don't happen in gas. What can we do about it? We need to tell the story, give that information, but we also need to make hydrogen real. You know, I've had various conversations with policymakers. One of the things that policymakers I think are struggling with is they can understand intellectually the points that we're making, but they need to deliver net zero. And today you can go out and buy electric appliances, but you can't go out and buy hydrogen appliances. And so there's a confidence issue, I think, for customers and for policymakers. And so I think as industry, we need to be doing more to make this transition real. And that's one of the reasons why our board-approved net zero strategy, which gets us to net zero scope 1, 2, and 3 by 2040, has an interim step by 2025 of being able to offer a pure hydrogen product for new customers. So a new subdivision, if there's a new subdivision that was never going to be on gas, they want it to be 100% sustainable, we want to have a green hydrogen solution for those customers from 2025, which requires appliances and so on. That will force us to make that transition and make it real. So there's a couple of the comments: not close off options and maximize the chance of success going forward.
It's a really fine balancing act though, isn't it? Because you got to find when the inflection points are when you actually can start to make that move. So it's interesting because governments will want to make arbitrary type decisions because that's what they do. So recognizing that could be a reality. As AGIG, what would be your recommendations around the risk management from you know, if there will be customers left behind, how do we soften that blow? What are the sorts of things that we need to be thinking about to make sure that if they are left behind, if they are still stuck on the network for whatever reason, that impost isn't as great as it otherwise would be?
Well, one of the most important things we can do is try to reduce the risk of a large amount of unfunded capital spent by the networks that's not yet been recovered from customers, and then ends up getting recovered from those unlucky customers who are stuck. And that's the RAB. That's what the RAB is. It's money that we have spent that customers have not yet paid for. And so a feature of our Victorian resets, and this is what happened in Western Australia as well, is to try to take money off the table, to try and reduce the outstanding asset balance, the RAB, as quickly as possible whilst maintaining price stability. That is the line to walk when we talk about making this transition without price disturbance. Can we still offer a price cut, take money off the table, pay down the asset, and therefore reduce the risk of a bunch of disadvantaged customers having to pick up the bill for that later? And as always, if you act early, it's easier to do that without a big price disturbance than if you leave it later.
And if I can just on this particular area, because it's really a key one, isn't it? Just seems to me that we're not at the beginning of this. We're towards the end of what's needed, really. I mean, the transition is really well underway, and you're going to see what you're talking about potentially being unlucky, being left behind. It's not really unlucky. It's actually was entirely predictable. This for those that are able to use technologies to move where they want to be. And, I think I've been talking about this for probably a decade, actually. So just as on your last day, can I invite you to go beyond the sort of this is the issue, this is what we've got to think about, to what you would pass over and have you passed over to the incoming CEO about as such a key actor in this area in terms of gas and the transition, what that plan looks like for customers. So rather than this notion of we'll see who's left behind and then we'll think about what we need to do for them, we actually put those customers at the front of your plan, because the others will look after themselves probably. That's what I'm suggesting. So could you just step us through what that plan is or what you think it should be? Thanks.
Absolutely. So the plan, Cassandra, essentially is to continue delivering the benefits that we've delivered to customers over the last 10 years, for example. And so what that looks like is continued highly reliable delivery of energy to the home for heating at flat or falling costs, but also with an environmental benefit, right? That's what we want to deliver. How are we going to do that? We want to keep connecting customers to the network because that delivers then those flat or falling costs. We want to make the arguments around renewable gas to policymakers, but also to the public, so that the public have confidence to continue using gas appliances. So we've started now advertising on TV in Metro Melbourne and also in Adelaide the benefits of renewable gas and the fact that there is actually a transition to a zero carbon gas which is available. And then rolling out our net zero plan. So that is new subdivisions for those that want them from 2025, 100% green hydrogen, which means appliances. And we're seeing the supply chain react very positively to that. When the largest gas distributor says going green, then hydrogen appliances come.
I'm just highlighting, I think, you know, you talked about the most important thing is choice. Well,
yes,
the customers that we're talking about, there won't be a question of choice. And so I'm just, again, you know, coming at from the customer point of view, the appliances that you were talking about, for example, you know, where is that work being done to actually make this, as you say, a real transition for them, so that we're, again, not creating a really two-class sort of customer base.
So customers have a choice today. You can go all electric today, or you can go gas today. You have that choice today, you know, if you can afford it, right?
Not if you're a renter.
Not if you're a renter.
No.
What we want to do is to preserve that option, to preserve the option to be able to use either gas or electricity going forward, and not to force customers from one to the other. To do that, we need to transition, right? We need to transition to renewable gas quickly, and we need to demonstrate that actually that's the best outcome for society to get to net zero. That's what we're doing. I think it's very, very clear, hopefully to everybody, that from a pure cost perspective, that is going to be the best outcome, because stranding a whole load of infrastructure and having to reinforce another class of infrastructure is very expensive, and potentially force people to get new appliances expensive. The bit that requires the communication is how actually what we're advocating actually helps us get to net zero more quickly as well. And this is about this, the next 5 to 10 years, if we put everything on electricity, is actually going to increase emissions because of where the electricity is coming from at the time of day that you use heat, combined with actually if we make progress on hydrogen and mains replacement. And this is very important, particularly in the multi-net area, because we still have a lot of old cast iron mains. We can reduce the fugitive emissions from multi-net by about 1/3 by 2030, solely based on mains replacement. So what we're saying to the Victorian government is, look, if you allow us to continue to execute this transitional strategy, not only will bills be lower and reliability be higher, but emissions will be lower in 2030, not in 2050, but in 2030 than they are right now.
I might just, as a comment, maybe for handover into the next 12 months, because if all we do, which is very important, is we focus on the emission reduction side and the sort of big picture transition, and we don't disaggregate it down to who actually is paying, who's getting access to the support, who's getting access to the technologies. We know today it will be people who are least capable because of their access to resources or their control over their living environment to reduce their bills and get the benefits out of this, because it should be a very exciting future. And for some people today, they're delighted, they'll be right. So I just want to really focus in on that one, because again, in terms of the Charter signatories, with those principles of customer at the centre, vulnerability, really each time speaking to putting the vulnerable customer in the front of that, I think, you know, helps rather than, again, the focus on the overall emission reduction or the overall transition and sort of a market response. Because I think the industry will need to work in partnership with other policymakers to deliver on what's needed, for sure.
Yeah. And if we make choices for customers, if we remove the ability for them to connect to gas going forward, or if they're already on gas, if we lock them into a rising price spiral as the number of customers decreases, then we're forcing them down a high cost path unless they do something different, which probably requires them to spend money on new appliances. And that is to be avoided if possible. If instead we can offer a path for the gas network to stay in business, so those customers who maybe don't have the time or the money or the wherewithal to change their appliances don't have to, and can continue to have affordable supply, that's the best thing that we can do.
Is there a role here for government as a shock absorber, potentially, Ben, as a part of a just transition? So, because not only do you need to change the way you operate your network for hydrogen, but customers obviously need to make a huge investment on their side as well. What role can government play, or governments play, in this to help smooth this transition a bit? Because we keep talking about these challenges are huge, and we're only really just started dealing with what's at stake from an infrastructure point of view. So
that was going to be exactly my question, because we know from talking to all of the CEOs about the transition or transformation, as one said it should be better described, that the industry has a big role to play, but you can't do it on your own. And so there is obviously a role for government and regulators and anyone else you would like to tell us about. And I'm thinking back to the way government intervened in renewables by offering solar feed-in tariffs, often highly generous. So does government have a role, as Andrew asked, and what is it? And are there other players who should be stepping up as well?
Yeah, I think there are some very important things that governments can do and are starting to do. There's one bucket which is around clearing roadblocks which are stopping industry from doing it at the moment, and that is underway. So changing the definition of natural gas, for example, so to include hydrogen and biomethane, so we're able to do it. This is in gas. It's not only a transition in terms of renewable gas, it's also a transition to distributed gas, because a lot of these injection projects will happen at the distribution level. And at the moment, the AEMO rules, for example, in Victoria don't cater for that. So there's a change, much like in electricity, to allow injection into the distribution network rather than just off the transmission network. So those changes need to get put through, and they are underway. Then we need to deal with the economic incentive, as you just alluded to Claire. We are going to see the federal government have announced through the technology roadmap that we will see this year an ERF method statement for biomethane, and we will see next year an ERF method statement for hydrogen, and that will allow ACCUs to be accessed for those things. That's about $30 a tonne, something like that at the moment. That helps. That level of carbon price clearly is low, really, by global standards, for what is required for the transition, but it may well be that ACCUs start to rise over the next few years, and that becomes a more and more effective method statement. So that's working well. Those are federal initiatives mainly. At state level, the various states, I think obligations on the distributors for us to procure our fugitive gas, our gas losses as renewable gas, that is the one easiest thing that can be done. And that is usually around 3%. Which for hydrogen is 10% by volume, and that gets us to our blending targets. So I think that would be a very useful thing to do. And then the other one I would call out is appliances. And I think regulations which require gas appliances to be hydrogen ready within a small number of years would be very, very helpful, because our roadmap with the blending by 2030 and then the full conversion by 2030, through to 2030, customers don't have to do anything. their existing appliances will still work with the blending. But if we go to full conversion, then the appliances will have to be adjusted. That's still cheaper than ripping them out and putting in new electric appliances, but it's still going to cost money. But if, as soon as possible, the new appliances that are going in are hydrogen ready, into the 2030s, by then, most of them will actually be hydrogen ready, and so the cost will be low.
Yeah.
Now the UK is looking.
This is similar, Ben, into, for example, the footprint of what we're building today, and so that it all should be EV.
Yes.
Accessible, for example, and we're not at the moment.
Yes, it's these sorts of things where we can see things coming. Let's make decisions to make life easier. And the UK is doing a lot of work in this area, and they have I was over there a few months ago visiting some of the manufacturers that are building these hydrogen-ready appliances. So these hydrogen-ready appliances, they're a hydrogen appliance backfitted to run with methane. And the standard for hydrogen-ready that they're developing over there is no more than 1 hour for the engineer to make the conversion at the time, and no more than it'll be between 10 and 15% of the original cost of the appliance to make the conversion. And it's expected that not only is it a relatively small percentage, but that would not be a cost which is payable by the customer at the time. That will be absorbed by the utility, for example, in some way, and socialized. So there's real thinking about how to do this. And if we do that soon, we make our life a lot easier 10 years from now.
So that's sort of talking about a retrofit of the burners in a ducted heating system,
or a hot water service. It becomes a hydrogen hot water service, but backfitted to burn natural gas. So when the time comes to convert it to hydrogen, you go in and you change the nozzle. It's 1 hour on site and you're done.
I think you mentioned before that the distributed gas is probably where it's going to be. So that then it starts heading down the electricity space, where electricity is made and consumed on a much more local basis. So the transmission network then becomes less important than the distribution network, which has more primacy because it's more about. So in that space, then you see the opportunity for. We were talking about local batteries or community batteries. Do you see a potential in the future for community or local or community electrolyzers?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely. And when we think about the rollout strategy, I think we're unlikely to repurpose all of the high pressure steel transmission pipelines for hydrogen. And it may well be that we site electrolyzers at city gates. So, you think the first one for us is going to be Albury-Wodonga on the Murray River. So the electrolyzers there will inject effectively at the injection point from transmission into distribution. So that'll be a distributed electrolyzer, quite large scale, 10 megawatts, and that'll put those 40,000 customers on a blend. And I think that will be the model for regional areas. Would you go smaller than that, sort of community scale? You might. It's going to be a trade-off between the higher unit cost for the smaller project versus the better economics of the hydrogen being produced close to source.
Like there is LPG days, are we, where we get the LPG guy to come around and deliver bottled hydrogen, or at least we have a local vessel and we have a hydrogen-powered truck delivering and topping up the vessel?
We may. I mean, the difficulty with hydrogen is it's like natural gas. You can't liquefy it very easily. So that, we don't bottle natural gas. We have to use LPG instead because it's easier to liquefy. But we could have stationary hydrogen bullets and truck hydrogen to I think our model for 2025, for example, for new subdivisions may well work that way.
Interesting. Bioenergy or biogas? I mean, that seems to be easier to incorporate than hydrogen. One, you don't really have to invent it yet, and it seems to be more cost effective than hydrogen. What do you think the potential for biogas is, biomethane particularly?
I think that there's good potential, and certainly, for example, Gemina in New South Wales is playing a leadership role in biomethane, I would say, at the moment amongst the gas networks. I think the view is that there's not enough resource out there for it to be, anything like a majority of the supply. So I think it's a tactical solution, not a strategic solution to the gas network. So I don't think we're going to be able to convert the gas networks entirely to biomethane, but it's still a good idea to do it because it will help. And as you say, it's easily incorporated because it's the same product once it's cleaned up. The difficulty that has happened so far is if you burn biomethane to produce electricity, you get a green credit for doing that. But if you inject the biomethane into the gas network, you do not. So there's a sort of policy asymmetry there. The CRF method hopefully will help with that.
Yeah. Cool.
On the some of the really good work you've done, sort of to prepare for the vulnerable customer strategy.
Yes.
Just be great for you to speak a little bit more to the work that you've done, where it's at right now.
Yep.
And as you hand over, if it goes how you hope it goes over the next 12 months, what do you think will be different for people who are vulnerable as a result of that strategy? Where would you like it to be in terms of outcomes for people?
Sure.
Thanks.
So thank you. So this came out of the work we did leading up to the recent reset in South Australia. So we used a co-design process to design what we were calling at the time the Vulnerable Customer Assistance Program. And that really focused in on a wish from the various different types of vulnerability for those customers, for us to be aware of their issues and to be able to provide them a differentiated level of service, taking into account their needs. That's essentially what customers were telling us. And so that is the program that we will roll out. And at the moment, we have sort of all customers and we have life support customers. And that's it. That's the only differentiation that we make today. And particularly for gas, there are not very many, real strict life support customers. There's hardly anybody that is medically dependent on heating and hot water in the way that you would be on electricity with a dialysis machine or something like that. So there's a whole bucket of people in between life support and absolutely fine who are not served properly, and that's what the priority service program will do. So the idea is, if you've got a certain vulnerability, maybe elderly or small babies, or maybe English is not your first language, or you're partially sighted, or whatever it is, we know about that, and then we interact with you in a way which is respectful of those needs. Now, you can't manage things unless you measure it. And so one of the most important things that we'll do, and again, this draws on our sister companies in the UK, is we've made a lot of progress on customer satisfaction. We will start measuring customer satisfaction for those vulnerable customers. And the target will be to have a high CSAT score for those priority customers. Okay. So we'll have a priority register. So and we'll have a CRM system sitting behind that. So we'll have the corporate memory of your needs and issues and when you've interacted with us. We will measure your satisfaction. So we would expect, for example, today that vulnerable customers are probably less satisfied than average customers. And so we'll be able to measure that and drive that up. And then the idea really is to assemble partners to work with us to meet services. And that's been the model out of the UK. So working with NGOs, social organizations, other groups in order to help deliver services. We've appointed a lady to run the priority service program, Stephanie Judd. So she's joined, she's up and running with that.
Right.
And that's now being implemented in SA and Queensland, and hopefully Victoria will follow.
Okay, great. Thank you for stepping out the detail of it. And, presumably you'll have that kind of evidence base to track, because having, we do know that there are large segments of people who struggle from affordability financially, but then there are people who have very particular risks. So
yes.
It's really great to see you focusing on both of those. Look, just on the, if I may, again on the, we were talking about earlier with Frank and Sabine about the year that's been, and some of what the signatories have done, which may dissipate unless there's an active decision from within the signatories because of it was the COVID era. There were government imperatives, for example, the moratorium on disconnection.
Yeah.
And I know you've been very actively involved in the not prior to disconnection. My understanding from your disclosure is you certainly are very committed to that you see that as certainly being beyond a COVID environment. can you just maybe expand on what you again hope would be achieved within the next 12 months on that front? And could we get to a stage where we don't disconnect anybody? And if so, what would we need to do to achieve that?
Look, and that's a really good way to sort of crystallize the issue. I think the not for disconnect, I think is a very good initiative conceptually, right? So it's a very good idea to give people the chance. This is real, this is going to happen, but there's an opportunity for you to do something about it and then avoid that pain. I think it's a really great idea. There's been two issues with it over the last 12 months. Firstly, it's been largely hypothetical because there've been lots and lots of disconnection moratoriums because of COVID, clearly. So actually, it's been quite hypothetical, and as we say, we don't really have the results. The other issue is, the Energy Charter does not include the two largest retailers, and they're not part of it. And so we would need to be able to extend it over a larger number of retailers. But to be fair, we've got enough to start with. If we can demonstrate that it's working and adding value, then maybe the other retailers come on board, and clearly pressure from the IAP and from other parties on this will help. So I think as hopefully lockdowns start to become a thing of the past, the not for disconnect initiative will become more important, and hopefully can be demonstrated to have added value, save money because going out and doing this stuff costs money, and then get the other retailers on board. That's what I'd hope. How would we get to a point where we never disconnect customers? Well, the water sector operates on that basis. There are other ways to deal with bad debts, but I'm conscious I don't want it. It's probably easy for me to talk to this because I'm not the retailer that has to deal with the collection issue. But there are ways to do it, right?
And
We have services to the home where there is no possibility of disconnection, and we do manage that.
Yeah.
Earlier today, Cass and Claire, I think we heard from one participant who has a policy that if they've identified a customer who is vulnerable, or they won't disconnect, because you simply disconnecting a vulnerable customer, you're not going to get any more money out of them. You're just going to create more vulnerability and hardship. So do you think something like that is more workable as a starting?
That's an interesting question, right? That's a very interesting question. If you're on our priority services register, does that mean that we've got a different view in those situations? Maybe, but again, we need the cooperation of the retailer on that.
Kind of like blood out of a stone type scenario.
It is more than, isn't it? There is, of course, there's the business side of that, and then there is the sort of just understanding that it is life-giving. This is one of those essential services, as we know very, very well.
Right. That's right.
And the consequences of disconnection are very severe. So there are ways, again, structurally, to knit it together so that there is an obligation, for example, on the retailer to alert so in a similar way to an eviction, for example, of where in some other countries you can't evict people onto the streets without alerting the responsible government that there is a family that's about to be homeless, and they have to come back with a proposal around a welfare package to support the family and to engage properly in a case management approach so that you don't actually make somebody homeless. And it's phenomenally successful because it means you can't just disappear, so that the individual is left with all the risk, and and so it has all these upstream effects. You can't disconnect. It actually has all the upstream business effects because you make sure you don't end up at that point more. So just we're being highlighting the good work on the the engagement and how far that takes you. Even that takes you very far to preventing disconnections. We've had this period of showing how important it is over the last period not to disconnect people. Why put a moratorium except to go, well, you just don't do it because people are at risk. And so how could we get it to that next level to say, just as an industry, we don't do it, and we're going to work on what we need to do to make sure that that particular outcome is not the one that ends up with the customer being the only person sitting there knowing that's what's happened to them, and they've got to come back in and navigate their way back in to try and get the lights back on.
I mean,
Look, sorry, Andrew.
no, it just leads into the other conversation around, how much is it reasonable for the industry to do? How much, how far down the sort of social justice chain should an energy industry do? I mean, we're seeing in other aspects of energy, networks and retail, that they have stepped forward and done a range of things, and moving into protecting people who are trying to get away from domestic violence, or a whole range of other things. And what's reasonable for the industry to do? And then at what point, to Cass's point, should they just be saying, hey, there's a problem here, we need to hand this over and make sure that this family or this person gets the appropriate assistance? It's not me doing it, it's finding that right balance, I think is important.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's why I made the reference to working with partners to support, priority service customers. Right, we're not going to develop a sort of social service type capability ourselves, clearly, and it's not reasonable to ask other customers to pay for the cost of that if we did. So it's more about the fact that we have this connection, and it's not a complete connection, clearly, because we don't have the billing relationship, but we do have a connection, with 2 million households, right, around Australia. And so there's information we can gain from that, that we can use to help, mainly by alerting other people, right? That I think is the role.
Yeah.
On the, avoiding disconnection, I think it's a good challenge. And, I think it's going to be a theme coming out of COVID, clearly, like many things are. We've done difficult things have changed. It's shown that we can deal with change in a way that perhaps we thought we couldn't previously. It's a reasonable challenge to say, look, you've gone 18 months without disconnections. Why do you need to go back to them? But that has to be a retailer-led discussion, because they're the ones on the front end of the billing.
Sure.
In fact, we thought that some of the companies who had trialled the not before you disconnect were saying that the case has been proven that there is an economic advantage to doing. There is an economic case to doing that. It avoids the bad debt, the reconnection, and all the rest of it. And so, if that is the case, our hope is that through the Energy Charter and the Better Together initiatives, that moves to business as usual, and then to scale as people see the benefit of that case.
And some of those, sorry, I was just going to very quickly say that some of those issues around cost, I think, are more compelling in gas, actually, because it has to be a physical activity. You have to, you can't, use a smart meter to do it. So it has to be a physical disconnection. And then when you reconnect, you've actually got to do that in a safe way. And you've got to relight and all that sort of stuff. So it is a much more intensive process in gas than in electricity as well.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So therefore the business case for not disconnecting becomes stronger.
I would have thought so in gas compared to electricity, yes.
Yes, good point. Ben, we are rapidly running out of time, so I wanted to check with Cass and Andrew whether you had any other questions, or Ben, whether you had any last comments that you wanted to make on the back of any of the discussion.
I've got lots of questions for Ben, but we've only got a couple of minutes left there, so that's fine.
Cass?
No, that's good. Just wish you well, Ben.
Yes,
Hey? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. I'm leaving the business at an interesting time, because we're at an inflection point where we will now have to push this transition to hydrogen at a much larger scale than we have before, if we're going to earn the right to preserve the option for customers, right? That is the big challenge for us. As I said earlier, we have to, lobby for the right policy settings, but we also have to move quickly as an industry and make it real. That I think is the key challenge for us over the next 5 years.
We've actually mentioned this to a couple of others, that we've been really impressed over the last 2 years of the reaction to COVID from the industry, and the focus and the effort in the last 2 years. But the energy transition requires that and more for 20 years. And that's an enormous challenge, but that's the one that's in front of them.
Yes, absolutely.
Ben, as you do walk out the door, is there anything? I know you've been intimately involved in the Energy Charter for some years. Is there something that you would really expect to see from us in our report if you were still in the game here?
I think your focus around no customer left behind through the transition. I can't remember whether that specific language was in there last year, but I really like that, because I really think that we've got to learn from what's not gone perfectly before, and some of the inequities from rooftop solar, for example, and the treatment of that was an avoidable issue with the benefit of hindsight. It's easy to say with the benefit of hindsight, but we have foresight now for that. Let's not do the same thing. With decisions around gas, for example, and strand a load of people who can't afford to go out and get shiny new appliances. So I think
I couldn't agree more. That's why I wanted to push you on it. If you could, if there was one thing you could give to us before you step out.
Yes.
Because that's, there were people 10 years ago saying the same thing about solar.
It's amazing
entirely preventable. Yeah, and to design the tariffs in a different way as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, Andrew, go.
No, it's just amazing how an obvious problem surprises people when it manifests. Like, it's happening again. You can just see it in a whole range.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have ended on a slightly more optimistic note, but we do have to end this.
Well, we're all here, Claire.
Yeah, indeed. So, Ben, all the best from us. Thank you very much for your work with AGIG and for your involvement with the Energy Charter, and thank you for the discussion today, for your disclosure, and all the best.
Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure working again this year and over the last 3 years with the Energy Charter. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.